It began on a wet Thursday, the kind that never quite settles. Rain came in sideways sheets, peppering the footpaths like spilled needles. The streetlights blinked in and out, uncertain, casting pools of gold that quivered across the bitumen. From her window, she could see the pedestrian crossing near the bottle shop. Empty, save for a black cat sitting on the edge of the curb. Not hunched. Waiting. The click of her boots echoed as she crossed the quiet stretch of Trafalgar Street, the sound swallowed by water pooling in forgotten gutters. A tram line hissed somewhere in the distance, its voice barely rising above the drumming rain. As she reached the crossing, she hesitated. The cat hadn't moved. It stared, not at her, not through her, but around her, as if it watched something just behind her shoulder. She stepped past it, uneasy, the scent of wet cement strong in her nose. Her hood sagged under the rain's weight. Behind her, she caught the faintest sound. A second pair of paws, soft and measured, padding through the puddles. When she turned, there was only one cat, seated as before, now at the edge of the next block. She didn't own a cat, never had. Yet something about the way it followed, not rushed, not begged, just stayed near, stirred an old familiarity, like catching a smell you hadn't thought of in years, and suddenly remembering the room it belonged to. The cat's fur shone damp under the street lamp, but no water fell from its coat. Inside her flat, the kettle steamed and clattered, filling the space with the comfort of small living sounds. She poured tea absently, glancing through the fogged-up window. It was gone. She hadn't seen it leave, just an empty street, a traffic cone knocked over, and the faint smudge of pawprints on the doormat. That night, her sleep was thin and tangled. The rain pressed like a second ceiling above her, tapping rhythmless patterns on the tin roof. At some forgotten hour, she dreamt of a garden she couldn't remember planting, full of flowering vines and heavy, watchful eyes between the leaves. A cat moved through the stems. Only it wasn't the one from the street. Its ears were torn, one eye clouded, and it looked tired, as if it had been walking for a long time. When she woke, her phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. "Hey, did you see that cat again? Weird little thing. Think it's been living under someone's car. Looked kind of messed up." She stared at the message longer than necessary. The living room smelled faintly of something metallic. She checked the sink. Empty. Then the carpet. Dry. Still the scent lingered, like coins left too long in your hand. Later, as she locked the door and stepped out again, the world had softened. Rain no longer fell, but the sky was the color of old newsprint. She walked slower this time. At the crossing, there it was, the cat. Only, it wasn't. Not quite. This one looked intact. Fur darker, cleaner. No limp. No cloudy eye. It blinked slowly when she paused to look. Then, with a grace almost theatrical, it turned and walked ahead. She followed. It led her almost incidentally, not like a guide, but like something retracing its own path. Past shuttered shop fronts, and bins that smelled of citrus peels and spilled beer. Past a bus shelter where a single glove hung from the bench, damp and forgotten. The cat glanced back only once when they crossed the alley behind the Thai place, as if checking to see if she could still see it. It stopped near a side gate draped in jasmine. The scent was overwhelming, sweet to the point of nausea. She hadn't noticed the gate before. Behind it, a thin trail of smoke rose from somewhere deeper in the lot, curling like a hand reaching skyward. Then the cat was gone again. No leap, no scramble, just no longer there. She stood there a long time, not sure what she was waiting for. In her chest, something had shifted. Not fear, not wonder, but a kind of stillness. A question, half-shaped. She turned back toward home, the pavement dark with nightfall now. Behind her, the alley whispered. Not wind, not voice, just something passing. And at the door of her flat, there it sat again, the darker one, whole and watching. Tail curled neatly, eyes wide, but now, beside it, barely visible in the murk, a second shape, frayed, lean, broken, and watching too. Dawn crept in low, heavy with mist, the city still tasting of wet iron and car exhaust. She stepped onto the rooftop for air more than clarity. The rail bit her palms. The sky hadn't decided yet whether to lift or collapse. Somewhere below, a bin lid clattered, and from the street came the smell of petrol soaked into gravel. The garden, if it could still be called that, slouched in disrepair. Rosemary gone to wood, mint long surrendered, pots cracked open like forgotten shells. She passed a half-buried saucer of rainwater, then stopped. In the mud beside it, 2 sets of prints, one crisp and recent, the other faint, wide-spaced, as though whatever left them hadn't quite touched the ground. And there, walking with all the weight of a real body, came the orange cat. He was unmistakably alive, ginger with rust-colored stripes, tail kinked, near the end like a question mark. A tear split his left ear. His coat was thick, the color of sun-aged terracotta, muddied at the paws. His gait was fluid but not lazy, more like someone who knows exactly where they're going and why they don't need to hurry. She hadn't seen him up close before, not really. Not until now. The ginger cat, or maybe Stripetail, the name, forming without permission, paused near the cracked planter. He sniffed at the broken soil, then looked up at her. Not directly, just over her shoulder. He meowed once, short, flat. Not for attention, but as if confirming something already. Known. And then, as if drawn by the call, the other one surfaced. It didn't walk. It appeared, behind the chimney again, coalescing from the gray like ash curling into shape. No color, no weight, just a worn outline with frayed edges. Stripetail didn't react, didn't flinch. Only turned back to the parapet and sat, tail flicking once, slowly. She felt something in her chest shift sideways. Not pain, not quite recognition. A memory leaning against the inside of her ribs. She crouched, balancing herself with one hand on the edge of a planter. There had been a cat once. A different one. A smaller life she'd tried to hold on to when everything else was already leaking through. The ghost cat hadn't moved, but its attention was fixed on Stripetail now, watching as he blinked, stretched, and curled onto the tiles. They were close, closer than the shadows allowed, but didn't touch. The wind picked up just enough to stir the dried thyme beside them, releasing a bitter, waking scent. Without warning, the smallest pot tipped sideways and cracked. Soil scattered across the concrete like spilled tea leaves. She blinked. Only Stripetail remained. The shadow was gone, sucked back into brick and overcast light. As she turned to descend the stairs, Stripetail followed a few steps before stopping, at the ledge. She glanced back. He was watching her now. Eyes half-lidded, tail wrapped over his front paws like a cat preparing to wait. Inside, at the base of the stairs, a rosemary leaf lay curled at her feet, slightly crushed, still, fragrant, and above, on the rooftop, the tiles gave a soft scratch, like claws adjusting position, but nothing more. The station hung in a kind of suspended mourning, its bones humming under dull fluorescent lights. She arrived without deciding to, her path shaped more by impulse than intention. The platform stretched ahead, smeared with shoe prints and crushed gum. The yellow line along its edge faded like a forgotten warning. The air tasted vaguely of old electricity and bleach. She wasn't alone. Stripetail sat near the far bench, perched atop a plastic map case that had warped in the sun long ago. His tail moved in slow arcs, steady and calm. A patch of fur on his flank caught the station's glow and turned it copper. He didn't move when she approached, only turned, his head slightly, ears twitching at some sound only he could hear. She stopped a few steps away. He blinked, once, then shifted his gaze to the opposite track. There, on the other platform, halfway behind a concrete pillar, waited the other cat, harder to see here, almost insubstantial in the morning glare. But it was there, the ragged outline, the shape that barely caught light. The air around it seemed thinner, as though it borrowed space it had no right to occupy. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The train arrived with a metallic exhale, brakes whispering against rusted track. Doors yawned open, offering warmth and motion. She stepped inside, drawn more by Stripetail's stillness than the train itself. He remained where he was, watching her with that unreadable feline neutrality. Ancient, self-contained. Inside, the carriage was mostly empty. A girl slept with her mouth open, head against the window. A man scrolled absently through his phone, earbuds blinking blue. She took a seat by the door. The fabric was scratchy and damp at the edges, holding the ghost of last night's rain. Through the window, the platform slipped away. Stripetail grew smaller, then vanished behind a column. She watched her reflection until it stopped resembling her. In the blur of glass, something flickered beside her, a faint suggestion of pointed ears, a lean silhouette where none should be. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the weight of what remained unspoken between memory and presence. An image rose. Years ago, a train ride much colder than this. Her lap cradled a cardboard box wrapped in an old towel. Inside, something fragile had gone very still. She'd stared out the window the whole ride, refusing to look down. When the train pulled into Central, she left the box on the seat beside her. No one had stopped her. Now, the train slowed again. She stepped off without knowing the name of the station. It barely looked like part of the city. Just scrub grass, a broken vending machine, and an ancient billboard for a phone plan that no longer existed. He was waiting. Stripetail stood near, the edge of the platform, fur backlit by a shaft of rising light that cut through the overcast sky. His tail swayed. She moved toward him, the boards creaking beneath her boots. He turned and trotted toward the hedge line, pausing once to glance. Back, she followed. Behind the station, a path curled through overgrown bottle brush. Stripetail wove between branches, paws soundless on packed dirt. A few meters in, he stopped and sat beside a warped bench half swallowed by weeds. He looked up, not at her, at the air, as if searching for something familiar in the spaces between leaves. No shadow appeared this time, just wind, moving in slow spirals, stirring the undergrowth. Yet the tension remained, coiled somewhere inside her chest. She sat on the bench, the wood damp through her coat. Stripetail climbed up beside her, close, but not touching. They sat like that for a long while. When she stood, he remained, watching. The weight of something unsaid pressed behind her ribs. Not grief, something more unresolvable. On the walk back to the station, she brushed against a low branch. A leaf caught in her coat's fold, dry, oval, gray at the edges. She didn't remove it. The train came. She stepped aboard. From her seat, she looked once more. Stripetail was gone, but the bench still held the curve of his warmth, and the air, briefly, carried the scent of soil, just turned. The box had slept above the wardrobe for years, its cardboard warped and puckered, with humidity, its corners gray with layered dust. She had forgotten what lived inside, or told herself she had. It came down with the scrape of wood and a burst of lint that clouded the air like ghost breath. The scent that followed was oddly sweet, paper warmed by time, a a trace of cloves, the acidic tang of old ink. She knelt beside it on the floorboards, pulse quiet and slow, as if her body understood something her mind didn't yet want to. Striped Tail lounged just inside the bedroom threshold, one eye open, his flank rising gently. He hadn't left her side since the morning. He wasn't demanding, only there, as though he had something to see through. She peeled back the lid, and the box sighed open, its contents loose and unruly. Polaroids curled with age slipped out. First, uncertain moments in yellowed light, people standing at odd angles, always near verandas or old cars. A boarding pass tucked into a paperback, a knotted scarf still holding the shape of a neck, a motel key on a nylon fob from somewhere. Inland? She sifted through, fingertips brushing fragments of her own forgetting, until they stopped. A page, folded 3 times, and creased as if held often. The paper was thin, the kind that tears if looked at too hard. She opened it. A cat, drawn in, dense strokes of pencil, looked up at her with off-kilter eyes. The lines were awkward but deliberate, each one layered as though the artist had needed to be sure. A single sentence was written on the back in unmistakable blue ballpoint. "He'll look after you when I can't." Her chest folded in on itself. The handwriting was her sister's, jagged, left-leaning, always underscored with too much pressure. A voice returned, faint and unfinished. Laughter in the hallway. "He's a tough little thing." That summer, the summer after everything else had stopped making sense. The one she hadn't spoken about in years. Her fingers curled around the page as if it might vanish. Striped Tail had shifted closer now, silent as breath, seated by her knee. His eyes were on the drawing, unblinking. The light in the room had changed, though the day had not moved. Shadows had thickened under furniture. Outside, a magpie called once, short and cold, then fell quiet. She looked up, and in the far corner of the room, beside the window frame, it stood. The second cat. No introduction, no sound. Just the slow resolve of shape from the edge of silence. Tattered where Striped Tail was whole, pale where Striped Tail held warmth. Its head tilted as if remembering something she hadn't offered yet. The drawing slid from her lap to the floor. Striped Tail didn't flinch, but his body tensed, tail flicking once, deliberate and slow. She rose without meaning to. The box lay open, its contents sprawled, forgotten. She walked toward the shadow cat, though her feet moved without instruction. It didn't back away. It didn't come closer. It existed like a doorway to something, unasked. For a moment, she thought she saw a collar. A thin one, the kind children tie with ribbon. The image flickered, blinked out. When she turned, Striped Tail was gone from the floor. She found him sitting on the windowsill, looking not at the room, but out, toward something only he could see. And beside him, faint and blurred in the reflection of the glass, the shape appeared once more. Not behind them, beside them, watching them both. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Something had opened, and something else, gently, had begun to leave. The dryers spun in slow revolutions, their glass windows pulsing with the warm blur of cotton and synthetic blend. The room hummed with an almost pleasant fatigue, the kind of sound that wrapped itself around your thoughts and tucked them into corners. She sat on a green plastic chair near the back, coat draped over her knees, fingers lightly curled around a chipped coffee cup. The air smelled of detergent and faint rust, mingled with the ghost of something floral and too old to name. A TV bolted into the wall muttered a cooking show to no one in particular, the screen color-faded and flickering as if half asleep. Striped Tail entered quietly, slipping through the automatic door before it closed. His steps made no sound on the linoleum, but the warmth of him was immediate. He brushed lightly against her shin and settled just beside her feet. Back to the machines, tail wrapped in a perfect arc. His presence didn't ask for notice. It simply became part of the room, like static or the smell of soap that never truly left your skin. She sipped. She hadn't meant to bring the old letter, but it sat folded in her coat pocket, softening further with every movement. The weight of it against her leg grounded her more than the chair ever could. She didn't know why she'd come, here. Only that she'd walked until the air felt right, until the lights turned slightly yellow at the edges, and the silence began to ripple. At the far end of the row, the ghost cat emerged again. Not from the doorway, not from the street. It was simply there, staring at the machines as though something inside them needed watching. Its body was thinner than before, longer in the spine, like it had stretched with remembering. It didn't look at her, or at Stripetail. Its gaze remained locked on the turning drum of a dryer, filled with a pale blanket that hadn't belonged to her in years. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees. Her reflection blinked at her in the dryer's curved surface, eyes darker than she remembered. Stripetail shifted, pressing his side against her boot. She didn't move, not to touch him, not to speak. Some things didn't require names, they only needed noticing. The door opened again and a woman stepped in, mid-40s, carrying a basket of mismatched socks. She passed right through the aisle where the shadow cat stood, offered a half nod, and began unloading her laundry. Her gaze never shifted, not even once. The ghost hadn't moved. It didn't need to. Stripetail stood then, slow and deliberate, and walked to the far corner, where the smallest dryer hummed without contents. He sat, looked at her, then at the ghost, then back. His tail twitched once, like punctuation. The fluorescent light above him buzzed and flickered, then steadied. She rose, her knees reluctant. The machines continued their slow revolutions, dragging fragments of the past around and around. She crossed the room and crouched beside Stripetail. The dryer behind her clicked, empty but persistent. When she looked back at the other end of the room, the ghost cat had shifted closer. Still not touching. Never touching, but near. Her hand moved of its own accord, not to reach for it, but to rest lightly on Stripetail's back. His fur was warmer than it should have been, and real. Every breath under her palm, every slow inhale, anchored her to now. A single word whispered, itself through her thoughts. Waited. She didn't know who it belonged to, or when. But it landed softly, without demand. Outside, the light had shifted. Softer, leaning toward late. She rose, Stripetail at her heel. The woman with the basket didn't look up. The TV showed steam rising from a bowl of rice. The door opened with a sigh. She stepped out, and for just a moment, in the reflection on the glass, two cats followed. One real, one not. And behind them, a woman not quite the same as when she entered. Afternoon melted into that odd, weightless hour where color flattens and sound stretches thin. She found herself outside her flat without remembering the walk. Keys loose in one hand, sleeves rolled above her elbows. The air was dry now, finally emptied of rain. The scent of lantana clung to the fences, bitter and green, while jacaranda, petals lay crushed in the driveway like bruised silk. Her neighbor's veranda creaked as wind shifted beneath it, slow and breathy, like something shifting in its sleep. Stripetail paced along the edge of the steps, ears forward, paws silent over scattered bark. He stopped near the far corner and looked back, then ducked under the slats with practiced grace. She hesitated. The space beneath the house had always felt forgotten, more crawl space than cellar, with its low ceiling of beams and the loose lattice half swallowed by vines. But something in the curve of his tail told her not to dismiss it. Crouching low, she followed. The ground was soft and cool under her hands, dry leaves flattened to a patchwork, dirt packed firm. The space opened just enough for her to sit on her heels. It smelled of old timber, rusted nails, and time held still. Light filtered through broken panels and slivers, slicing the darkness into angled shapes. Stripetail waited near a stack of bricks, one paw raised, his eyes alert but calm. She didn't speak, just breathed and looked. At first it seemed empty, but then she saw the faint imprints, small, shallow arcs in the dust. Paw-shaped, but faded like watermarks, spaced strangely. They stopped at a spot where the earth looked slightly darker. Not dug, just darker. As if something had once rested there for a long while, and then the temperature shifted. It wasn't cold, more like stillness deepened, the way a room changes when someone walks in without sound. She turned, slowly, and the shadow cat was there again, its form only half defined, as if seen through sheer fabric. It lingered near, the far beam, neither closer nor farther than necessary. Its eyes, if they were eyes, didn't reflect light. They held it. Stripetail didn't move, but his body leaned subtly forward, gaze steady. He looked between them once, then twice, then down at the earth. She understood nothing in words, but something inside her stilled. She shifted her weight and brushed her hand across the soil. The texture was different here, cooler, finer. The scent changed too, gaining a trace of iron and something soft, like wool damp with memory. She sat like that, between the two of them, Stripetail on one side, the ghost cat on the other, without touching, without crossing the invisible, threads that hummed between them. A low creak echoed from the veranda above, the house breathing, or remembering. She closed her eyes and let the sound settle into her ribs. When she opened them again, the ghost cat had dissolved into light and dust. Stripetail stood, circled, once and pressed his side to her knee, not for warmth, but with a quiet sense of certainty. Above, the wind stirred dry leaves into a slow spiral, and from beneath the house, for the first time in years, she felt not hidden, but held. Morning came like breath warming a mirror, slow, near invisible, soft around the edges. The flat was quiet, save for the kettle beginning its low murmur, steam coiling upward in patient spirals. She stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on the sill, eyes unfocused. The sky was that particular Sydney gray, the kind that blurred rooftops and made sounds feel further away than they were. The floorboards beneath her feet held a trace of yesterday's cool. She hadn't seen Stripetail since the crawl space. He'd vanished before she crawled out, her palms dusty, heart not heavy but somehow full. She'd half expected him to be, waiting on the step, tail flicking, gaze steady. But the yard had been still, and the veranda had given nothing away. Now, as the kettle clicked off, she reached for the mug, plain white, chipped rim, the one she always used when she didn't want to think. Steam brushed her lip as she sipped. The tea had steeped too long, but she didn't mind. The heat grounded her. A sound. Not loud, not insistent. Just the faint shuffle of weight against the front door. She crossed the room slowly, breath caught, somewhere just behind her collarbone. Hand on the knob, she paused, then opened. There he was, Stripetail. But he looked different. The same torn ear, the same burnt ochre coat, but his fur held a stillness she hadn't noticed before, as if it remembered something the rest of him had forgotten. He sat perfectly balanced on the threshold, tail wrapped tightly around his paws, eyes clear and level. Behind him, the street was misted in pale light, the trees along the footpath dark and precise. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, but not the nauseating sweetness from before. This was softer, greener, like a scent left behind on an old scarf. She stepped back. He entered. No hesitation. just movement. He walked to the rug in the center of the room and curled in the exact place the sun would hit later. His eyes closed. A breath. Then stillness. She watched him for a long while. Time didn't stretch, it folded. Then something caught her eye, reflected in the dark of the glass door. A second shape, just for a blink. A low, hunched silhouette beside Striped Tail. Thinner, faded, watching, and then gone. Not with drama, not with purpose, just not there anymore. She didn't turn to confirm it. Instead, she sat on the floor beside the rug, tea cooling in her hands. Striped Tail didn't stir. He didn't need to. He was home. Outside, the street began to wake. A bin lid clanged. A dog barked twice. Inside, everything remained still. The kettle clinked softly as it settled back into silence. She didn't speak, not even to herself. There was nothing left to say, only the warmth from the floor beneath her and the shape of a cat asleep, real, alive, and just enough. And in the corner of her mind, the faint echo of paw steps, no longer following, just passing through.